Good morning, everyone. As everyone's joining, just going to give it a couple minutes for everyone to get on the line. So we'll get started in just a moment. And thanks so much for joining us. Okay, I'm going to kick us off really slow today so that we have a chance for everyone to get on the line. But I see that the participant list is jumping up every second. So, but I want to make sure that we have a lot of time for discussion today. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thanks for everyone who's joining as a participant. So I'm going to kick us off. My name is Angela Giacchetti, and I lead member engagement for the Open Mobility Foundation. Again, thanks so much to everyone for joining us today, especially at this time of day, which I recognize is painful for maybe everyone on the call. We have our friends on the west coast of the US just starting their day, and our friends in Europe just ending. We're going into the summer holiday season, but we're really looking forward to having a great discussion today. And also this meeting will be recorded and made available for folks after the event. I'm going to be starting off with a little bit of context on the Open Mobility Foundation and kind of why we wanted to plan this webinar. Then I'll be handing it over to Ivo from POLIS Network to give us a little crash course on the EU state of play. And then we'll jump right into discussion with our amazing speakers and end with Q&A from you all on the line. So please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A feature at any time. Again, we'll answer those at the end, but as they come up, feel free to use that Q&A feature. You should see it in the controls at the bottom of your screen. And yeah, we'll kind of get right into it. So first, again, a little bit about the OMF and why we really wanted to help facilitate this discussion. It's no secret to everyone here that our transportation systems are changing rapidly all the time, particularly incorporating more and more digitally enabled ways of moving around. So think ride sharing, shared e-scooters and bikes, autonomous vehicles, and even delivery robots. And traditionally, we've kind of measured and managed transportation through physical infrastructure. But as these connected services play a bigger role in our lives, and as we have more and more kind of pressing policy concerns, cities need new ways of managing those modes of transportation to ensure that everyone has their needs met in safer, more equitable, and environmentally sustainable ways. And so we'll be focusing on that kind of last part today. The Open Mobility Foundation is a nonprofit that provides open source solutions, digital tools for cities to address those needs. We are a city-led membership organization, and our mission is to transform the way cities manage transportation in the modern era. Over 60 cities, transit organizations, and private companies are members, including, I'm sure, many of the folks participating today as an attendee, and also we have some of our members speaking here today. We also get philanthropic support from foundations like Rockefeller and Knight, and we also have an advisory committee of like-minded nonprofit organizations like POLIS Network. We steward two main tools, which I'll briefly go over. First, the Mobility Data Specification, which is a digital tool that helps cities better manage transportation in the public right-of-way. This tool is essentially a set of APIs that standardizes communication and data sharing between cities and private mobility providers like e-scooter companies, bikes, car share companies, taxis, and TNCs, so passenger services. And this tool allows cities to share and validate policy digitally, so to communicate out, enabling better vehicle management, better outcomes, It also provides mobility service providers with a framework that they can reuse in new markets. So it's a standard which really allows for better collaboration with cities. MDS was released in 2018, and it's now being used in over 180 cities that we know of, in over 25 countries. And we just released a major new version of it in May this year. Newer but equally relevant to this conversation, we also steward a specification called the curb data specification, which was released last year and is now being used by almost 36 cities and companies around the world, including some of the speakers here today. It is like MDS, it's a digital tool, a set of APIs that help cities and companies pilot and scale dynamic curb zones. So again, it's this kind of two-way communication, digital communication tool that provides a mechanism for expressing curb regulations by cities, and then also measuring activity at the curb. And the goal is really to help develop policies that can create more useful curbs and meet policy goals. So to sum it up, both of these tools can be used to set and communicate policies, manage compliance with regulations, and calculate common metrics. This means that they can be a component of low emission zones, whether those programs are focused on kind of last mile and curbside management or a more broadly defined area within a city. Both MDS and CDS, the tools that we steward, are free to use and built in an open source environment. So that's why I say, you know, our best guess is that these tools are being used by hundreds of cities, but public agencies and mobility providers all over the world can freely adopt, implement, and continue to develop each specification. So we are a kind of co-creative environment, or we create a co-creative environment. We really take pride in our governance model. It prioritizes transparency, consensus, decision-making, and a formal approval process before those changes are implemented. And so we work in a very collaborative environment, and really invite you to learn more about kind of how we work, how to get involved with our development process. You can see the specifications on GitHub and just learn more on our website. But as you may have gathered, we are huge nerds, specifically on the data front. But ultimately, we're developing these tools with a greater mission of aligning technology and data with policy goals. So the North Star for us is to make sure that cities have the digital tools that they need to do things like improve air quality, reduce harmful emissions, and a variety of other policy goals, which we won't be talking about today. But that's why we've gathered these transportation and policy experts around the table to discuss their experience with low emission zone programs. Our goal is to share learnings across different geographies. So you'll see a variety of cities represented here, talk about different approaches, and discuss the challenges associated with different program phases. So for example, planning versus managing a more mature program. So you will hear from Ivo from POLIS Network, from Jacob from the Portland Bureau of Transportation, from Josette from Amsterdam, Jordi from the Barcelona Metropolitan Area, Kelly from Automotus, and Lauren from the LA Cleantech Incubator. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ivo to give us a brief EU state of play, and his presentation is a lot funnier than mine, so buckle up.
Yeah, let's share the slides. Yeah, I thought for me, my holidays are starting soon, and it's either early in the morning or late in the evening. So I try to keep it light, although it's a very serious topic, because we are talking about schemes that are politically very riskful. And I think we are talking about ways to decrease the risk, yeah? So the political risk, but also the implementation risk, the operational risk of these schemes by means of using the right tools, and that's why it's good to exchange across continents on these topics. I'm Ivo Cré. I'm Director of Policy and Project at POLIS. We're a network of about 120 cities and regions and other public actors working on urban mobility innovation. I've been working on this topic on what we call in Europe urban vehicle access regulations, or UVARs, for a while now, trying also to develop recommendations on the topic, and we'll share some links later in the chat as well, working on the link between access regulations and sustainable urban mobility planning. Also trying to find solutions for very concrete issues like enforcement, etc. I've brought together a little bit of material for just a couple of slides on the European situation, that you are that the frame is set also on what the colleagues from Amsterdam and Barcelona will present. I think a first important issue is to understand that we are in Europe on a pathway towards clean zero-emission vehicles, and that's set at different levels. So I wanted to open my slides by saying, dude, where is my car? But it's a bit more complicated. It's about defining which type of vehicles we want for which purpose, and also by when in the next decades. And if we look at different geographies, steps are taken at the continental level, at the EU level. We are looking at an internal combustion engine sales ban by 2035, which also will include or come with a manufacturing change or ban. We are looking at further restriction on emissions from cars by 2035 for those vehicles that still will be manufactured to have an internal combustion engine. It's also interesting that in this Euro 7 classification, so this new, more environmental friendly internal combustion engine that is currently under decision, that we are talking about concepts like hybrid switch, so that in hybrid vehicles, the switch to electric drive will be geofenced and will be actually, there will be an interference with the vehicle to make vehicles run on electricity in certain zones. Also for buses, we are looking at an internal combustion engine ban by 2030. And at this moment, at European level, we're also discussing more stringent air quality directives, which will bring the norms closer to the WHO standards. So there's actually quite a push and a drive from the European level to make the change. Several countries have taken that as an opportunity to be ahead of the pack and to be better and faster in banning internal combustion engine sales. There's a couple of examples on the slide with Norway, Ireland, Netherlands, Sweden, and there are others. So timelines for 2025, 2030, where the fleets will gradually clean up. It's also a way to signal to the industry that these countries are interested to be there as a market for electric vehicles, and also to be there as a market for charge point operators. Other schemes or where authorities step in at a regional or country level are, for instance, in Belgium, where company fleets will be electric vehicle only, so for the company cars by 2025. The cities and metropolitan areas are working on clean air for a while through low emission zones. And these schemes are also getting more stringent, more gradually more restrictive, bringing also concepts like ultra low emission zones, but also zero emission zones. And these are are focused on freight in most cases, with, for instance, the Dutch cities, 29 of them committed to being zero emission zones for freight by 2025. And then the last geographical scale, let's say, so the curbside management, and I know many of you are interested in that topic. On the side of the EU or Europe, this is slowly starting. There are some cities that are starting or have tried to link environmental performance of vehicles or weight and dimensions of vehicles to pricing of parking or availability of parking, but it's a difficult discussion. It's not very, it's not going very fast. But returning to the concept of access regulations, we see that cities plan according to different objectives, and that also evolves over time. So the reason why cities start to regulate access changes, and we are now, for many cities, in a phase of planning for access and regulating access for reasons of space management, placemaking, increasing quality of city life and quality of the environment, with focus on air quality, but also on noise and other factor, but and issues like modal shift as well, space availability for other modes, etc. So that also brings this focus on low emission zones as an and zero emission zones as a factor. We have many schemes in Europe. So if you want to see them all, go visit urbanaccessregulations.eu. This is a very complete resource of information. It might not be interesting for you because you're not traveling in Europe, but behind every dot on the map, you find information about the actual regulation that applies, and also background documentation with regards to how local regulations are formulated, how they are implemented. So there's a lot of information on the website that can be very interesting for you, just to understand how the regulations are designed. The multitude of schemes and the difference between the schemes across countries and even within countries makes that information for travelers and for professional road users is extremely important. And that's why we are working on information provision. And this in two ways. I think the first concern is to have informed drivers, private drivers as well as commercial drivers for commercial our commercial road users, who are often crossing borders, traveling between cities also. So the idea is to bring low emission zone information from the city hall, where the regulations are drafted, into the mobile phone or the sat-nav devices of the travelers, of the drivers. This was a concern that was raised also by the European Parliament, not by the left wing side of the Parliament, but by the conservative group in the Parliament, who said, who asked to develop a way forward out of the lack of information, and so we developed a tool called UVAR Box that actually translates the regulations into a machine-readable format using DATEX2, which is a mobility or a traffic data format, which is applied in Europe, and that gives information that is fed to national access points for data, which then can be used by apps developers, by service providers. So this approach will be legislated and will be actually obligatory in the near future. So cities have to provide the access regulation information in this format so that it can be openly available for all developers. Another need for information are informed authorities. We will hear from several speakers, I hope, that enforcement is an incredibly important element to make these schemes efficient and effective, but also to make them fair. And in Europe, a specific concern is cross-border enforcement. So the idea that non-resident vehicles, so crossing borders between member states who each have their own vehicle registration service, that they actually, that these vehicles are addressed and informed, and that compliance is that they are enforced and compliance is assessed in the same manner as resident vehicles. For this, we have two options on the table in view of a digital solution out of this problem. There's the Cross-Border Enforcement Directive. I will not go into too much detail, but this is basically a law that is there for road safety offenses. So if you speed or you drive through a red light, a red traffic light, you get fined, and these kind of fines can be addressed in an European level. So if you're a Romanian driver, you get your fine if you speed in the Netherlands. And that directive could be expanded with breaches or non-compliance to access regulations. Another option could be to work on the electronic tolling systems directive, which has another approach. It's basically an account-based system where you become a client to a service provider, and the access regulation scheme should then also be part of that service. So if you breach the access regulation zone, you get the cost gets added to the bill of your tolling service. So both systems are equally good or bad, but it requires a lot of data exchange and a lot of trust also between all actors. So that's in very brief where we are in Europe. So a lot of schemes, a lot of fragmentation, but also a lot of experience in the cities, and we'll hear of that later, and also a growing interest in using data, using ITS, and using using intelligent solutions to make the schemes more efficient and make them more fair. So I'll stop sharing and give the floor back to Angela.
Thank you. Very helpful context and some interesting things for us to discuss in a bit, but now I'm going to turn it over to each of our panelists and allow everyone to we'll go around in alphabetical order and introduce a little bit more about yourself and share about a 5-minute high-level overview about the low emission zone program that's either running in your city or that you're planning on running. So we'll start with Jacob.
Thanks, Angela. I'm not used to being first in the alphabetical lineup, so I was running the alphabet really quick in my mind. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Sherman. I work at the Portland Bureau of Transportation in Portland, Oregon. We're located in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Really excited to be here today talking about some of the work that we're doing, and kind of following off of Ivo's presentation and some of the closing comments about it in the European Union, there being a lot of schemes and a lot of fragmentation. I think that's a very different story than what we're experiencing here in the United States, where there's definitely interest in the topic, but there's only a few folks who've kind of made some moves in this area. I'm thinking of Santa Monica, Los Angeles, Pittsburgh, and in terms of kind of the comment about a lot of fragmentation, I think some cities are really focused here in the United States about learning from one another and building on kind of efforts that others have kind of applied, which is certainly kind of core to our work. So last year, we applied for United States Department of Transportation SMART grant to plan for and pilot zero emission delivery spaces in a small portion of our downtown, really focused like others, looking at LA in sending market signals to try and encourage the use of more zero emission delivery vehicles. As part of the project, we're planning on kind of testing out and piloting different technologies, from kind of sensors to be able to kind of understand curb management and curb utilization in near real time, to digitizing the curb and digitizing some of our rules about access regulations and being able to communicate those in a machine readable way to the private sector, as kind of a second kind of focus of the work. And then a third focus of the work is really around partnering and working with businesses, working with tenants, working with shippers to really understand what are the opportunities and challenges and how can we help accelerate the transition to zero emission vehicles. So super briefly, our proposal to the US government involves taking and reprioritizing kind of 3 existing loading zone areas in our downtown by our city offices, proposed by our county offices, as well as near some of our federal government offices, and temporarily reprioritizing those existing commercial loading zones to be for zero emission vehicles only. Just as we prioritize access for bicycles by putting bike parking racks in the right of way, just as we prioritize parking spots for carpool because they help advance our policy goals, we want to try out prioritizing access for zero emission vehicles to understand how that might help us. We identified this preliminary area because it's really anchored by public sector institutions that have very strong climate commitments. The city of Portland has been planning with the county, developing our joint climate action plans for well over a decade. And then partners at the federal government have strong overarching executive orders from President Biden about reducing, decarbonizing the economy and decarbonizing the transportation system specifically. You know, I think unlike maybe some European schemes, I think it's important for our project to recognize that all vehicles can still travel through the zone. Vehicles that use diesel or gasoline can still use on-site loading bays. They could still park in some of the metered spaces, or they could go to some of the adjacent loading zones nearby and use those. So we're really focused kind of on these 3 loading zone areas. And some key components of the work is not only some of the stakeholder engagement in the design of this, we're just getting started with this project to be clear kind of where we are in the project life cycle. But it also involves working with eco-logistics companies. And so we've proposed to the federal government using some of our grant resources to help also create incentives to make kind of the reality of the freight system we want to see. So we're planning on using some resources to contract with a local cycle logistics company to say to shippers and other business tenants, you know, if you can't bring zero emission vehicles into your fleet right now because of supply chain concerns or because of cost differential, we can work with this other third-party company who will help complete some of the deliveries for you into the area. We're also planning on testing, as I said, sensors and data collection technologies, learning with other US cities who are working with us and the Open Mobility Foundation on digital curb management strategies, and then getting into research and evaluation of our pilot project. I think wrapping things up very at a high level, our intended kind of outcomes of this SMART grant is really, I'd say broadly, about understanding kind of the opportunities and challenges of these different approaches. You know, what are the upsides and downsides of reprioritizing curb access for our climate goals? What are the upsides and downsides of digital sensors? How well does kind of coding the curb work from a municipal perspective? And then what are the opportunities and challenges and the incentives around working with private sector companies to help them accelerate their transition to zero emission vehicles. We don't have an answer to many of those questions, and this pilot project supported by the US federal government is really going to allow us to kind of step into that sandbox and kind of learn through doing over the next 18 months. So thanks so much, and I'll pass it on back to Angela.
Thanks. So we are going to head to Barcelona next. Jordi, we're going to hear about your program now.
Hello. Hello, Jordi from Barcelona Metropolitan Area. I'm going to share my screen because I have a presentation. It's a long one, but I will focus only on a couple of slides, maybe 4. And later I can share with the organization of the webinar the complete document if anyone is interested in it. So we are Barcelona Metropolitan Area, that we are a supramunicipal administration encompassing 36 municipalities and near 3.2 million inhabitants. We implemented the low emission zones in 2020, and from then we have implemented different low emission zones in different municipalities, but all of them are permanently working from Monday to Friday, from 7 in the morning to 8 at the evening, and only non-contaminant vehicles that are identified with these 4 environmental stickers can drive in the area. That means that we are talking about all kinds of vehicles that are motorcycles, cars, vans, trucks, and buses. Since then, we implemented an enforcement based on technology. We have more than 300 cameras. We check plate numbers and we check if that plate number is authorized or not to drive in the low emission zones, according if he have the environmental level or have one of some authorizations and permits to drive in, that we have several ones according to social and business aspects. And since then, we get really good results. If you can see on this graph, on 2017, before the implementation, 20% of the vehicles in red were pollutant vehicles, and at the end of the 2022, only 2% of that vehicles that are driving in the area are still pollutant. And if you see the green and blues ones, that they are the most environmentally friendly vehicles. That means the newest gasoline and hybrid and electric ones grow it up. And finally, the data comes that the different pollutants fall down. It's about more than 50% of the nitrogen oxides fall down, and more than nearly the 20% of the biggest small particles. And that would be a quick presentation of our experience, and we'll be really glad to talk about how we do it and we achieve all these results.
Thank you so much. These are powerful charts. And as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box at any time. We'll answer them all at the end, but if something comes to mind that you want to make sure that we discuss, or a question that you want to make sure that we answer, feel free to put it in there. We'll stay in Europe, and I'm going to hand it over to Josette.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Josette Vallentgoed-Udo. I'm responsible for the team in the city of Amsterdam that's looking after the low emission zones and now also the zero emission zones. Our journey started in 2019 where we basically created the vision for the long term to become a city with far less air pollution than we had at that moment, and we focused on mobility. And there are, of course, a lot of reasons for air pollution. Some of them we cannot control as a city, and we've decided to focus on the ones that are related to mobility. So there, the whole vision and the overall plan started with a goal to become a zero emission by 2030. This is our main goal. But in the meantime, of course, things have changed. Corona came. We have different WHO advices in terms of air quality. So we revised basically our plans, and we made them applicable for 2025. Because 2025 is coming very soon. We need to basically adjust our plans. So 2025 is basically the start for the city of Amsterdam to move from a low emission zone to a zero emission zone, which we also tend to call the new normal. So from 2020 onwards, we've been basically regulating polluting cars, trucks, scooters to enter the center of the city, but also the area which is within the ring road of Amsterdam. And that change has basically, like in Spain, has enabled us to meet the European regulated air quality norms and levels. But we want to go further. We want to basically be able to adhere and align to the WHO guidelines. So that's why we're aiming to become a full zero emission city. That of course doesn't come overnight. We need to ensure that we have enough public charging for that in place. So we have been very busy with enabling that and providing that. There's a lot of communication, education that needs to take place. So also measurements in terms of air quality have been extremely important in getting buy-in and support from the people and the organizations, and of course also the mayor and the aldermen within the city. Last July, we've basically provided a adjusted plan for how we're going to start from 2025 onwards. And there's a slight difference in what was mentioned before. We are one of the 29 cities within the Netherlands, but we start for every modality. So for trucks, for vans, for cabs, we start by basically closing the tap, which means that if you buy a new vehicle from the 1st of January to 2025 that needs to be electric or H2, that's a necessity. So that's for all new vehicles that are being registered from the 1st of January 2025. For the existing vehicles, we have transition arrangements, and they are allowed until 2028 or 2030 to continue driving within Amsterdam. That transition period is necessary for a couple of reasons. We have a couple of challenges. Availability of vehicles, that's one of the challenges. Congestion areas that we have within the city, that's another big one of our challenges. We need to make some changes there. And of course, we need to allow for organizations with big fleets to make that transition in a way that's not going to jeopardize their business continuity too much. So that's what we're looking at. We've been doing this from within the city center to the ring road to basically the whole of Amsterdam. That's the approach that we take. We're doing this for boats, scooters, cabs, trucks, vans, everything. What we're at the moment not doing from 2025 onwards is basically addressing personal cars. Those are regulated by the central government within the Netherlands, and we are not, as a city, not yet allowed to make this a zero emission zone. So for personal cars, this is a low emission zone, which is fine. But of course, we want to go further because we're very ambitious in this field, and we basically we aim for providing our citizens and our visitors with clean air that they are entitled to. At the moment, the people in our city, they're still smoking approximately 4 cigarettes a day just by being outside, running outside in a park, on the streets. Children that play outside on the street, in playgrounds, they are approximately inhaling the substance or the PM10, PM2.5 compared to 4 cigarettes at the moment. And we, as a city, we cannot allow for this to continue. So this is a high priority for people, for our mayor, and for our aldermen in order to proceed. In terms of technology that we use, like in Spain, but unlike some other countries in Europe, we've totally digitized the access to these zones. There are hundreds of cameras within the city of Amsterdam. So there's no way that you can access the city without receiving a fine, unless you come from a different country, as previously explained by POLIS. There we still have challenges in order to basically get those fines refunded. So that's our situation. We're in very exciting times. By the end of the summer, we'll basically receive a lot of feedback from our citizens on our plans towards 2025. We've started huge campaigns in terms of communication this summer to ensure that everybody knows about what's starting with in 2025. And we're looking forward to work with the city and the organizations together on making this all happen.
Thank you. And I love that you have a kind of explainer of the impact in very real terms. So I appreciate that. We will head back to the States, and I'm going to hand it over to Kelly.
All right. Thanks so much, Angela. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again so much. My name is Kelly Ferguson. I'm Chief of Staff with a technology company that provides curb management solutions called Automotus. I think as we go through this conversation today, the thing I think that we provide is this perspective of working with several cities to tackle these challenges, and what we're seeing between those cities and that process in terms of implementing zero emission or low emission zones. And in our case, we've worked at this point with 3 different cities at various stages taking various approaches to enacting low or zero emission delivery zones specifically. So what we do, we're, as I mentioned, a curb management company. We provide these solutions via camera utilizing computer vision. And so we're looking specifically at the curb. And depending on the city that we're working with, we provide a number of different types of solutions. So first and foremost, we're looking at mobility insights and data. So what's actually happening at the curb so that cities can make better informed policy decisions. And in the next phase, it's really looking at how we can enact policy. So whether that's payments at the curb, or in many cases, incentivizing electrification, whether it's through access only or through incentivized pricing, we're able to do that as well. And then as the conversations come up a few times today, how do we do enforcement? And that's a challenge in any city in the US. And so and it sounds like abroad as well. So we're going to touch upon that a little bit today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 cities that we're currently working in. And I know that Lauren is going to also be hitting on these as well as part of this DOE project that we're all involved in. And so a little background for those of you who may or may not be familiar, the city of Santa Monica deployed a zero emissions delivery zone back in 2021. And at the time I was with the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator working on this project with the city to implement it. And at the time we selected Automotus to be the curb management provider. And so what that looks like in the city of Santa Monica, there are 2 kind of main commercial districts in which they wanted to incentivize zero emission delivery technologies. One of those technologies was looking at how we can provide preferred curb access to zero emission delivery vehicles. That could be electrified trucks, that could be bicycles, scooters, what have you. And so in these cases, the curb management solution that we provided was analytics only. So we were providing that baseline data for how are curbs performing when they're zero emissions versus how they're performing when they're just a control, either standard regulations for a loading zone or no regulations at all. And so at this point in time, we're providing that data continuously as part of this larger project with the Department of Energy. And earlier this year, I think about a month ago, we released a case study on the results that we saw in the early stages of the project. And so we're looking at expanding continued control areas in these commercial areas in Santa Monica in the coming year or 2. All right, and then a nearby neighbor in Los Angeles around the same time was looking at deploying zero emission curbs. And in those cases, we're providing monitoring and providing analytics to 3 of those locations so far. There's a total of 5, and we also are monitoring another 4. So here we're providing data to the LA Department of Transportation, and then looking at how we can scale that to a number of 100 or so smart loading zones, and looking at next steps to automate payments and automate the incentivization of electrified vehicles. So what this looks like in both LA and Santa Monica, we deployed these solutions first while with various steps of policy kind of following behind. And so you'll see kind of a difference here between what's been done in California versus what's been done across the United States in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh. So the difference here in Pittsburgh, we started with a policy base that allowed us to charge for access to the curb for smart loading zones. Now, the big difference here is that we haven't yet enacted legislation to do zero emissions, reduced pricing for these zones, and that's to be coming up in the next quarter. But right now, what we've seen are 20 automated loading zones that have been in operation since April of last year. And we're in the process now of scaling to an additional 200 throughout the city. And so those are going to look at continued automated payment. And so this is a completely passive system once a vehicle or a fleet is registered. And then there's going to be enforcement by mail coming up very soon. And again, the policy to incentivize electric vehicles. So all 3 of these cities are kind of taking different approaches, looking at deploying technology, and then how policy plays into that is a huge element to actually making that behavior change. And so what we've seen so far, as it may not be surprising, is even though we don't necessarily have the zero emissions legislation in effect in Pittsburgh yet, we're seeing a lot of those benefits that come with just the simple act of charging for using a parking spot, increased turnover, less double parking, less idling and congestion, that all benefit air quality in the long run. So, and I think I will pause there And
Thank you.
yeah.
And now I'll hand it over to Lauren.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Angela. And building off of Kelly's presentation, I will not get too much into the weeds, so I'll keep this short and sweet. But my name is Lauren Harper. I'm the Senior Program Manager on the Market Transformation team at Lacey, and I'm also the PI of the DOE Vehicle Technology Grant that Kelly mentioned. We are working to test and evaluate curb management strategies in order to accelerate electric vehicle adoption in the last mile delivery and TNC vehicle space. So if you don't know anything about Lacey, we are a nonprofit working to create an inclusive green economy. We do this by supporting startup programs. We work to implement public-private partnerships. We do pilots and we do policy work. And then we also work to support creating a workforce that can support the clean energy transition through enhancing communities. And so we also have the Transportation Electrification Partnership, which many of you may know of. It's a public-private partnership with a ton of different folks in Southern California working to meet several 2028 targets for the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And so within that, we have some goals to have 100% of shared cars be electric vehicles, and then also medium duty vehicles to be 60% electric by 2028 as well. So I just want to put that out there as a preface before I dive into the presentation. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So this project specifically works to build off of what the work that was done in the Santa Monica Zero Emissions Delivery Zone. It's taking place in 3 major cities, so Pittsburgh, Santa Monica, and Los Angeles. And so we are working to scale not only zero emissions delivery zones, exploring different applications and integrations of curb management policy in order to improve the strategies that can support zero emissions delivery adoption. We're working to reduce air pollution and quote unquote disadvantage of frontline communities or environmental justice communities. And then we're also working to increase productivity at the curb by better understanding how folks are utilizing it. And so I keep saying we, there's a royal we, there's a ton of partners that are working on this. It's a coalition of different technology providers like Automotus, regional transportation organizations, universities, and national labs, and researchers at the national labs, and it runs through the end of 2024. And so these are also Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and Pittsburgh are some of the cities with the worst air pollution in the United States. And so we're hoping to find out if we can reduce some of the e-commerce pollution there. So then some of the goals and the relevance, I won't get into everything in this slide, but there's obviously overwhelming traffic at curbs due to e-commerce. Sometimes cities have fewer policy levers in order to make some of these changes swiftly. And then there's behavioral change that is sometimes due to just a lack of enforcement. So we're working to establish incentives to create these dedicated spaces in these cities. We're also going to be working to develop a roadmap to support these cities and their policy structure and help curb users by identifying different data and ways to improve curb opportunities. And then we're also working to empower and expand the capacity of enforcement on different city teams. So then I have created this slide. So to understand how users are utilizing the curb, we're using automatic license plate recognition software to monitor activities, as Kelly went through. And so we're working to specifically target the audience of delivery drivers and transportation network companies or rideshare cars for hire who regularly use the curb. So we will be testing these real world and simulated traffic interventions and different incentives to see how we can shift behavior and work to increase or support EV adoption. And so the slide here shows the different enforcement levels that we're working to test based off of the 3 different cities and where they're at when it comes to city policy. So there's advanced enforcement, as Kelly mentioned, working to bill people by mail, essentially. There's assisted, working to help direct different officers and nominal. So these are kind of the different categories that we're looking at. And then last, as we are now at the midpoint of this grant that I mentioned runs through 2024, there are just 2 events that we're going to be hosting coming up. So if you're interested in either learning how you can become a zero emissions delivery city, we have a RFI out about the Zero Emissions City Challenge. So one of my colleagues is hosting a webinar on August 8th if you're interested in that. And then I will be hosting a webinar with all of those partners you saw on the first slide on August 10th, just share some of the different tools and the things that have come out of our project. So I will stop there. Back to you, Angela.
Thank you so much. So again, if you have questions for either all of our panelists or specific panelists, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, but we will move into discussion now as you all are thinking of questions. So really broad one, I think, to start. We talked about various metrics, or we heard about various metrics in these presentations. I want to just hone in on it a little bit more to start us off, I think, because many of us have this kind of data lens for things. But if you had to kind of pick that one North Star metric that's really important to you, what would that be? And then on the other hand, is there something that you wish you could measure in your program that you are kind of struggling to measure, or there are challenges around measuring? And I'll just open up the floor to anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can give a couple of thoughts about that. So I think what is quite interesting is that these measures are probably more evaluated and more assessed than other measures. And that's also quite strange. I mean, there are expectations in terms of performance that you don't put to other measures in the field of mobility, so I think that we might overshoot a bit the evaluation of these measures, or undershoot the assessment of other measures. So it's also a trick of people who are opposing measures to really focus a lot on assessment and on impact. But of course, it's important to understand the actual impact. So that's not the issue. I think we need to assess environmental, social, and economic issues, and that's of course a challenge, because we are working in complex environments where different aspects impact on that. So, but don't forget the fairness, the social issues, the economic impact, as well as the environmental impact.
I can jump in. One of the things we've been working on with the National Renewable Energy, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. There's a lot of acronyms I have to remember on a daily basis. So one of the things we're working on them there is looking at mobility energy productivity, which is kind of its own theorem, but then there's ways to optimize it. And so they've done this for walking, they've done this for transportation in different ways, whether that be public transit or individual light duty car transit. But one of the things that's a little bit harder to do is look at it related to delivery and TNCs, because you're trying to figure out how efficiently you can move different packages, parcels versus people. And so working to kind of understand that metric a little bit more has been a challenge for us. But we're working with Automotus and the other partners to find different ways to look at this and to likely adapt that mobility energy productivity formula so that we can better look at that. But that's one of the harder or more challenging type of metrics we've been looking at.
To add, sorry.
Okay, we can hear you.
Yeah, for the city of Amsterdam, you're asking for one metric, but I'll give you three, of course. So for us, it's nitrogen, it's particulate matter 10, and specifically lately particulate matter 2.5, and CO2 emission. So those are the three that we're planning to reduce, that we're continuously measuring throughout the city, that we specifically know in which part of the city we have a certain challenge, and those metrics enable us to basically create zones that are quite large, that are not specific to a certain street or a certain part of a street. It basically allows us to basically block total areas of the city for huge amounts of vehicles. And these metrics are important to us as a city on a continuous basis. So not only for mobility, they, of course, the CO2 emission, the reduction of that is a broader program, and we are part of that. But we are, with our program, contributing to 11% of the CO2 reduction. And the nitrogen and particulate matter metrics, they are being compared to the European standard. That is a regulation in Europe, which enables us to basically take quite some drastic measures, or have allowed us to take quite some drastic measures. And there's another benefit to the use of these metrics, is that it allows you to be entitled for certain subsidies. That's at least how that happens in the Netherlands, but also in Europe. As a city, you can apply for air quality subsidies, subsidies that are specifically created in order to reduce CO2 emission. So those metrics are being used, broadly.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in really fast. I think at a high level, and didn't provide it as kind of frame to start, but the city of Portland has established broad goals in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So in Portland, transportation accounts for over 40% of our local greenhouse gas emissions. And unlike the building sector or the energy sector, transportation is actually increasing in terms of our GHG footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Those other sectors are decreasing. So I think at a broad level, we've said we need to see a 50% reduction in GHG by 2030, and then obtain net zero by 2050, and that's off our 1990 baselines. Whether and how this pilot project will have a measurable impact on those, I think we're not wading into making such specious claims. I think that's where we really are interested, though, in understanding how a project like this can help accelerate transitions in fleets. As I've talked to some of the major freight couriers recently, some of them have said, oh, this is great. This is going to help us prioritize resources to your market. And so I think those kinds of maybe more quantitative outcomes are something that we're going to be looking at in this kind of stage 1 grant. As we potentially grow or evolve this work, maybe we'll look at some of those other things, but I think we're really early days and want to be careful about what it is that we're trying to evaluate and measure.
Yeah, and if I could add in here, I think Jacob made a good point. The scale of these projects really matters in order to be able to measure things. I know one of the things that when I was at Lacey and we were first looking at the Santa Monica project was, how do we measure these, polluting metrics? And with the scale of having just a few streets. And I think that matters from a couple of perspectives. It's difficult to measure that out against the background noise of just being in a giant metropolis. So I think that's something to really think about and adjust your metrics accordingly based on the size of your project. But then also similarly, fleets and it mattering to the participants. If it's just the larger the better, it's gonna more incentivize people actually taking action. So that's one of the things I find exciting about this DOE project, is the fact that we're going from just a handful here, a handful there, but scaling it to a point where this will actually have an incentivizing behavior to fleets and increasing electrification from that perspective. So a couple points.
Absolutely. Jordi.
Thank you. Well, I already presented our main indicators. That was the pollutants at the beginning, but I would like to enforce the idea that we have the experience of having a height control because it was a very political controversy around the low emission zones implementation. So everybody was waiting about the results and the performance. And we as technicians said that we are only able to calculate the emission factors from the vehicles that circulate inside the area of the low emission zones. So, and that's very important because there are many factors contributing to the pollution. Traffic, transit and vehicles are one of them, as is one of the most important, but it's difficult to calculate. So we based our results only on this factor of the and the emissions factors from the vehicles, and we do that thanks to all these cameras that we have implemented on our low emission zones. So we read our plates, we get the data from the National Transit Agency about the engine of each vehicle. From that point, we elaborate the emissions factors. So it's how we measure the performance.
We talk a little bit about the controversy. I know that there's a big challenge around getting these types of programs started. Lots of different challenges depending on where you're located, what your local kind of political context is, you know, what you have the kind of authority to do based on your jurisdiction. So is there any kind of advice for how to overcome some of those perhaps common challenges that you might see in many different geographies and jurisdictions?
Yeah, in regard, I would like to hear specifically from the US speakers why this the through traffic is not addressed. So the European schemes are very much or only focusing at really giving access. We're not focused enough on creating the value of the last meter, let's say, of the curbside. So we notice that the real impact is created by not allowing through traffic. So is that also linked to the competence you have as an authority, or is that an issue of political risk why you don't address that? Yeah.
I think without getting too far over my skis, you know, I think there could potentially be some legal issues around access regulations, and so in the US regulatory context is very different than a EU context, and so you know, there's a number of issues around interstate commerce and other things like that create a need to think carefully about how we're doing this. And I think that's where to date cities have rightfully maybe steered clear of some of those potential issues, and instead are focusing mostly on things we do every day and have been doing for hundreds of years, which is around curb management and how we manage our streets. And again, we make, I'd say, intentional decisions to prioritize access for a variety of things kind of all the time, whether again that's carpool or bike parking or hotel parking or motorcycle parking or short 30-minute parking, 15-minute parking, 2 hour, you know, the list goes on and on. So why not think about prioritizing access for zero emission delivery alongside the other kinds of delivery that we do? And so I think that's been kind of the approach that we've started to take. I don't know if Kelly or Lauren has anything else to kind of provide from that US perspective.
Yeah, if I you know, I think, yeah, a lot of it's jurisdiction, like cities have always, they have control over the curb. it's not necessarily control over access to certain roads. That can change depending on what road it is. So it could be, state or even higher. So I think the curb is an area squarely in the jurisdiction of the city, and so they can, manage that. Not necessarily exactly how they want, but like there's a process for it. And then, focusing on commercial delivery, I think is more politically feasible at this point. And it also has, a huge impact. A lot of the vehicles are still diesel vehicles, so finding ways to convert those to cleaner vehicles, I think, has an outsized impact. So yeah, I think those are some of the areas that I think are kind of the best process forward that I've noticed working with different cities.
Yeah, I agree with both Jacob and Kelly. I'll just add, like, Lacey does a number of different pilots. And so one of the things that we do on an annual basis is like work to just understand the general political landscape of where we're at. And like, especially if we're going into a project, what kind of regulatory hurdles exist and how will that then be realized by the public. So also just working with community partners, not just the city, but also community partners to raise awareness, get the word out to different citizens. Like one of the really great things in this project has been hearing about the self-registration that some of the participants in some of the smart loading zones have done in some of the cities, which is really interesting because if there's the regulation that comes up on top, then people feel like they don't have a choice. And there's all these volunteer people who are self-registering into the system, which is a really beautiful thing. And then one other thing is that like we're working to consider equity specifically in our project because in some political appetizing spaces, some people can see prioritizing EV spaces as not fair or not equitable to people who are not able to convert to ICE vehicles. So that's something that we're working to keep in mind. And when we're looking at different incentives or interventions, whether that is the real world modeling or the simulated, how can we create some sort of fairness, whether it's time of day or whether it's at the end of the day, everybody is regulated the same way and things like that.
Thank you. And one of the things that I've realized through this conversation and through setting this up, and maybe we'll have to do a part 2, but there are a lot more similarities than differences, even given the difference of kind of, approach. There are some of these challenges are actually pretty similar. So just that I'll have you weigh in, and then this leads into some questions that we have from the audience as well.
Yeah, so I recognize this challenge. If we look at the highways that are going through the city of Amsterdam, we as a city are not the owner of those. So we cannot control them. And we also need to allow for pass-through traffic to pass through via those highways. However, everything except for those highways as a city, we can control.
Yeah. So this brings up one of the questions in Q&A, kind of adjacent. So it says, let's answer this live. And this is for Jordi and Josette. There are ways for non-zero emission vehicles to get permits or authorization to drive in the zone. So can you share a little bit more about how those permits work and some of the requirements?
Sure. I have one slide explaining about this. Well, we have several authorization and exemptions because our implementation was quite managed and negotiated within, but from the one side, from the business sector, and from the other side, from the social sector. So in general, for general people, we have authorizations and exemptions for people on low incomes. So are temporary authorizations for families that have low incomes. And also there is a daily permit up to 24 per year for everyone. Also, we have different authorizations related with health. We have for people with health requirements or recognized disabilities that cannot use public transport, bicycles or whatever, and needs to or must drive. We also have the exemptions for people with reduced mobility, of course, and also for those people that are doing trips to different hospitals or medical services for medical treatments, because as we implemented at the beginning on the Barcelona ring road, there are from big hospitals or restaurants for all the regions. So there is this authorization. We also have related for business. There is a grace period for replacement for those professionals from transport that are buying a new vehicle, a new truck or new van. There is also an exemption for those professionals that are approaching in the retirement age. They also are exempted for changing their vehicle. And we also have the special vehicles exemptions that are several kind of special trucks and different kind of vehicles that are very that have a very long amortization and then cannot be changed as usual quickly. And according to what we call City Life, we also have an agreement with repair workshops. They can register the vehicles that are from their clients, then those vehicles can go on and off from the repair shop without problem. We also have what we call activities with municipal authorization, that's for fairs and filming activities and whatever that needs to be a vehicle that needs to have an authorization. And of course, the last one was for the emergency vehicles and other essential services, that it's police, fire department, ambulances, funeraries, army, etc. This does not include public transport services and other municipality services that, for example, for gardening vehicles or garbage recollection services. We think that those kind of services are essential, right? But need to be an example of adapting the municipal fleet. We all manage all this with what we call the Metropolitan Register that we manage from the Metropolitan Area. So each citizen can register online, present the documents, and fill a form, and we give them access or deny it. It's a quite quickly explanation, but I think it's enough to get an idea. And if anybody needs any data, we can talk later individually.
Great, thank you. And are these fairly in line with Amsterdam's exceptions?
Definitely. So most of them we have in place already at the moment, and we'll have in place for zero emission zones as well. The one that I don't see that we have is the one for companies, where they can show basically that if they have to transition to an electric vehicle, that it will have a huge impact on the profitability of the company. And that's also a reason for some companies to be allowed to continue with their diesel vehicle in the city. I think the one that I find most interesting, and that's one that we're also discussing a lot at the moment in terms of mobility poverty, is the low income one. So what we do have is for low income, we have specific subsidies in order to transition to an electric vehicle. Those we have, but we don't have allowance into a zone based on income. That will be a very interesting one in Amsterdam. I'm going to pick this one up. So, but we don't have that one at the moment in place in our city.
It does stand out to me that even with these exceptions, you're able to drive such good results, which I think is a nice takeaway. We'll have time for one last question. We're getting to the end of this, but I want to also tap into kind of the use of data and digital standards and kind of talk about the digital management of these spaces. There are a lot of elements of these programs that are analog, but we had a kind of question in the chat about the use of geofences and what kind of data tools or standards are used for the geofencing areas. And then also from Diego in the Q&A, the question is, will it be mandatory for all the rules, regulation that you showed in the map to use DataX2 as the de facto data standard when broadcasting them to developers or navigation platforms who would then communicate it to drivers, or are there other data standards in play? So Ivo, I'll hand it over to you to just talk about a little bit more about the data standards.
Yeah, I pushed the wrong button. So I wanted to type to Diego, but I sent an email in between. But indeed, I mean, if you look at the legislated parts of the discussion in Europe, it's set with EU-based standards. So that's the case, but I think it's really also a challenge for the continent to where you have countries and schemes that use analog identification with stickers, and then schemes that are basically automated number plate recognition based. So you get these two streams, and it's also an issue in many cases of privacy culture in countries, and also in the actually urgency of the measures. If you really want to have result and impact, immediate impact, you need to go to digital solutions and digital enforcement. Otherwise, the measures are far too expensive to monitor or to enable compliance to the measures. So for many cities, this is the biggest ITS scheme they put in place. So it's a real full cordon style of traffic management, but it can also help other traffic management options they want to explore. So in that sense, it's also a useful investment. So yeah, I think I think Jordi has a very great example of how they have worked on enforcement. Also, could be nice to hear from him.
Yeah, can you elaborate?
Me?
Yes.
So about the enforcement, what we do is we have for national vehicles, we are connected to our national traffic agency, so we get all the information from there. So our citizens don't need to be anything to go in and out from the low emission zones. Only those who need to justify to get the authorization or exemption must register their vehicle. And we have also the need to register our foreign vehicles because we don't have data interchange between countries right now. But we are working on that in order to get this data interchange and to be able to exempt the other, the European mostly citizens to register the vehicle before coming to the low emission zones area, and also to enforce and to find those that don't complain about the rules. So that's a hard work that we are doing now from both sides. Technically, that we are mostly resolved it, and legally, that's the most. They will have a long way to do yet on that in the European environment.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on this kind of concept of digital management? I think we could talk about it for a long time, but any kind of final hopes and dreams for it, or concrete plans, and maybe share a little bit more about the thinking and the benefits there?
Well, I know that in one of the cities they're working on a code the curb project, and so just better inventorying, having a great inventory of where every single thing is, where the red curbs are, yellow curbs, green, white. We have so many colors in LA, and I still kind of want the purple curbs, Kelly, in LA at some point for the smart loading zones. But I think that like that's one of the places that digital assets is like so important, especially if you want to do something like dynamic pricing where the price changes during the day. We do a little bit of this as some zones are actual parking at night after I think 8 p.m. or 6 p.m., which is really cool. But I think like having this digitally inventoried and then potentially having all of the information accessible to the public can also help to make some of the changes we're hoping to see with the different incentives and regulations we're creating.
I would add there too. I think it's the only way to really scale things quickly, not just like in a local, in a city, but then beyond that. So I think it's super important to speak a similar language, and then as a vendor, to not have that unpredictability when we're going into a new city and be like, oh, now we have to create an entirely new system that like speaks to this new system. It is, I think, critical.
I think, and maybe just to chime in a very different way, I think I don't disagree with the things that were said, but I also think in a US context, there's also interesting conversations we probably need to have with members of our community around topics of freedom, privacy, and technology. And I know social norms are kind of constantly evolving in that space, but that I think is and I know some folks on the call have experience in that, but I think is just another kind of dynamic that has to be kind of explored as part of any of these projects.
Yeah, that's a good note. And related to one other question, which maybe we can answer really briefly, but are there any kind of, do you have any wisdom to share in terms of how you communicate these programs, whether that be the benefit or how some of the changes are happening? How do you communicate with the community? Maybe one gem of advice.
Yeah, so maybe for the city of Amsterdam, what truly helped is that we talked about the long term. So we talk about a few years ahead, and we talk about air quality, saving lives, better quality of living, and we talk about CO2. And I think in all our discussions, whether that's with big companies or with a cab driver, everybody is aligned to work towards that goal. How soon and how that's done, of course, we all differ. But when we start talking about with the end in mind, where we want to be, and we put that in a covenant, and we ask organizations, companies to write down when they think they will become a zero emission, for example, as a company. If you work from that, then you don't regulate. You work together as a government. You work together with the cities and with your citizens. And we believe that that's the best way.
Thanks. And Jordi?
Yeah, the same from Amsterdam. We did a strong communication campaign before the implementation of the low emission zones regarding the effects on health from pollution, and the importance to reduce the pollution. And once we had the communication campaign done, we started talking about the low emission zones as the solution to that problem of health and public health, and that was had really good results on a citizens way. Citizens how to say that they were agree about the problem and the solution. So it was not a citizens' opposition to the low emissions zone implementation. And it's very important for us to do that previous job of talking about that non-visible health problem, that's the pollution.
Thank you. a good reminder that what we do has impacts beyond the transportation sector. And I think such a good call out that these are public health issues as well. And maybe I'll encourage everyone to work collaboratively, within your organization, because sometimes these programs can be strengthened with insights from different disciplines. So with that, I just we're out of time today. Thank you to all of our speakers for your wisdom, your insights, your learnings. We really appreciate it. And I just want to thank everyone here for attending, and for the other nonprofit organizations that helped us make this event possible. POLIS Network, ICLEI has also helped us kind of spread the word. So we will make the recording available as well as any of the speakers' slides. There's a ton of information in there. And I know folks are curious to get their hands on that. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day or evening or summer holiday. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.